It was a crisp, sunny morning in a quiet neighborhood where Carlos had just moved in. The birds chirped cheerfully, and the streets were unusually quiet, perfect for a fresh start in a new country. Carlos had always dreamed of living abroad, but he hadn't anticipated one small problem: his limited knowledge of English. As he got out of bed and stretched, his stomach growled. He smiled to himself. "Looks like I need breakfast," he thought, heading toward the kitchen. Opening the fridge, he froze. It was practically empty except for a bottle of water and an old lemon. Carlos sighed. "Well, this is it," he muttered. "I have to go to the supermarket." The thought of going shopping shouldn't have been intimidating, but for Carlos it was. He had studied some basic English phrases back home, but using them in real life was another story. What if he didn't understand what people said? What if he pronounced? Determined not to let fear stop him, Carlos grabbed his shopping list. It was short but essential: milk, bread, eggs, and some vegetables. He repeated the words to himself as he put on his shoes. Milk, bread, eggs. I can do this. He decided to make a mental plan. Okay, I'll ask for help if I can't find something. Maybe I'll use "excuse me. Where is—" That sounds polite enough. Carlos checked his reflection in the mirror. "You've got this," he whispered, trying to boost his confidence. As he stepped outside, the fresh air hit his face, and he felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. This wasn't just a trip to the store. It was his first real challenge in adapting to a new life. With each step toward the supermarket, Carlos began to rehearse phrases under his breath. Where is the milk? Where is the bread? He imagined different scenarios: someone pointing in a direction, replying too quickly, or worse, not understanding him at all. The supermarket came into view, its bright logo shining in the sunlight. Carlos took a deep breath. "All right," he said. "Let's do this." Carlos stood outside the supermarket, its automatic doors sliding open and shut as customers went in and out with carts full of groceries. He paused for a moment, gathering his courage. "Okay, here we go," he murmured, stepping through the doors. The cool air of the store greeted him, and he looked around in awe. The supermarket was much larger than he had expected. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched endlessly, packed with colorful products. Signs hung overhead, but they were all in English. Carlos grabbed his shopping cart and took a deep breath. "First things first, milk," he said to himself, looking up at the overhead signs. One of them read dairy, but it was further down the store, and he wasn't sure which aisle to choose. As he hesitated, he noticed a friendly-looking store employee stacking boxes nearby. This was his chance. Carlos rehearsed the phrase one last time in his head. "Excuse me, where is the milk?" His heart pounded as he approached the employee. "Excuse me," Carlos began, his voice slightly shaky. The employee turned and smiled warmly. "Yes, how can I help you?" she asked. Where is the milk?" He managed, his accent thick but understandable. "Oh, the milk is in aisle 3, she said, pointing toward the far corner of the store. "Aisle 3, thank you." Carlos replied, relieved that his question had been understood. "Of course." "Let me know if you need anything else," the employee said before returning to her work. Carlos pushed his cart toward aisle 3, feeling a small surge of confidence. That wasn't so bad, he thought. Arriving at the dairy section, Carlos scanned the shelves. There were so many options: whole milk, skim milk, almond milk, soy milk. The labels were in English, and some of the words were unfamiliar. He hesitated before grabbing a carton of whole milk, deciding it was the safest choice. With the first item checked off his list, Carlos felt a little more comfortable. He glanced at his list again. Next, bread, he said softly, steering his cart toward the bakery section. As he passed other aisles, he noticed how organized everything was. Signs marked each section clearly: snacks, cereal, frozen foods. He realized he could probably find most items just by following the signs, but he still repeated the English words to himself as he walked. At the bakery, the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Carlos scanned the shelves, marveling at the variety: baguettes, whole wheat, rye, sourdough. He reached for a loaf of white bread, feeling proud of his progress. 2 items down, 2 to go. The nervousness that had gripped him earlier was beginning to fade. He was starting to enjoy the process of exploring the store, even if it was a bit challenging. As he moved on to find the eggs, Carlos couldn't help but smile. Maybe I'm getting the hang of this, he thought. Carlos glanced at his list again. 2 items were left: eggs and vegetables. Feeling a bit more confident after successfully finding milk and bread, he pushed his cart down the main aisle, scanning the signs above. Eggs should be near the dairy section, right? He thought. He turned back toward the refrigerated area and walked slowly, looking at each shelf carefully. The word eggs finally caught his eye on a small sign next to some other cartons. He stopped in front of the shelf, examining the options. Why are there so many kinds of eggs? He wondered aloud. Some cartons had labels like organic, free range, and cage-free. Others showed large numbers like grade A or large. It was overwhelming, but Carlos remembered his goal: just find something familiar. He reached for a carton labeled large eggs, reasoning that it seemed like a safe choice. As he placed the carton in his cart, a woman next to him picked up a different brand and smiled. "These are good," she said, holding up her choice. Carlos hesitated, then nodded. "Oh, okay." "Thank you," he said awkwardly, his nerves returning slightly. He quickly pushed his cart away, grateful for the suggestion but still shy about his English. Now it was time to find vegetables. Carlos moved toward the produce section, guided by the bright colors of fruits and greens. The area was vibrant, with neat piles of apples, bananas, carrots, and lettuce. Signs above each section listed names and prices, but Carlos realized some of the vegetables had names he didn't recognize. He picked up a small zucchini and studied it. "Is this the same as what I know back home?" he wondered. To be sure, he decided to stick to items he could identify: a few potatoes, a head of lettuce, and some carrots. As he added the vegetables to his cart, a new question struck him. How would he weigh them? He noticed a digital scale nearby and watched as another customer placed apples on it, typed a number, and printed a sticker. Carlos stepped closer to see the instructions. The sign above the scale read, "Place your items, select the code, and print the sticker." Carlos looked at his carrots and then at the code written on the sign next to them: number 4023. Carefully, he placed the carrots on the scale, punched in the code, and waited. A small sticker printed out, showing the weight and price. Okay, that wasn't too hard, he thought, sticking it onto the plastic bag. He repeated the process for the potatoes and lettuce, each time feeling a little more accomplished. With all the items on his list now in his cart, Carlos let out a deep breath. He had done it, or so he thought. Walking toward the checkout lanes, he noticed something he hadn't considered before: snacks. A row of colorful bags and chocolates caught his attention. Maybe I deserve a treat for getting this far, he said to himself, laughing quietly. He grabbed a small chocolate bar and added it to the cart. As he reached the checkout area, he realized another challenge awaited him: paying. But for now, he smiled at his cart, full of items, and felt a growing sense of pride. Carlos approached the checkout area, where several lines of customers waited with carts full of groceries. The buzzing sound of conversations, beeping scanners, and the rustle of bags filled the air. He hesitated for a moment, trying to decide which line to join. Eventually, he picked a line with fewer people. As he waited, he rehearsed possible phrases in his head. "Do you take card? Can I have a bag, please?" His palms felt slightly sweaty, but he reminded himself that he'd come this far. Finally, it was his turn. The cashier, a young man with a friendly smile, greeted him. "Hi there. Did you find everything okay?" Carlos blinked, caught off guard. Yes, he stammered, nodding quickly. The cashier began scanning the items, and Carlos watched as the prices appeared on the screen. Milk, bread, eggs, vegetables, all the essentials he had worked so hard to find. "Do you need a bag?" the cashier asked, holding up a plastic bag. "Yes, please," Carlos replied, proud of his quick response. The cashier packed the items neatly into 2 bags and then said, "Your total is $24.75. Carlos froze for a moment. He understood 24, but the rest sounded like a blur. He glanced at the screen, where the numbers confirmed what the cashier had said. "Oh, okay," he mumbled, pulling out his debit card. "Card or cash?" the cashier asked, gesturing toward the card reader. "Card," Carlos said, holding up his debit card. "All right, just insert it here," the cashier instructed, pointing to the slot on the machine. Carlos followed the directions, inserting his card and waiting for the screen to prompt him. "Credit or debit?" the screen asked. Carlos hesitated, unsure which to select. The cashier noticed his confusion and kindly said, "If it's a debit card, press this button." Carlos pressed the button and entered his PIN, feeling slightly embarrassed but relieved when the transaction went through. The cashier handed him the receipt with a smile. "Here you go. Have a great day." Carlos took the bags and nodded. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and gratitude. As he walked toward the exit, he realized how much he had learned in such a short time. Each interaction, though small, had been a step forward. He had asked for help, found what he needed, and successfully navigated the checkout process. Stepping outside into the sunlight, Carlos felt a wave of accomplishment. The trip to the supermarket had been more than just a chore. It had been a test of his courage and willingness to adapt. And he had passed. With his bags in hand, he headed home, already planning his next adventure in English. Back at home, Carlos placed his grocery bags on the kitchen counter and let out a long breath. The trip to the supermarket had been challenging, but it also felt like a major victory. As he unpacked the items, he began to reflect on everything he had learned during the experience. "Let's see," he said aloud, holding up the carton of milk. "Milk. I asked for this in the store." "Excuse me, where is the milk?" He repeated the sentence a few times, focusing on his pronunciation. Milk, milk. I think I said it okay. He picked up the loaf of bread next. Bread. I didn't need to ask for this, but I saw it clearly marked in the bakery section. And there were so many types: baguettes, rye, sourdough. Bread is definitely a good word to know. Carlos moved on to the eggs. Eggs, he said, recalling the moment he had hesitated at the shelf. Grade A large eggs. I didn't know what those labels meant at first, but I chose something familiar. And someone even recommended another brand to me. Maybe next time I'll ask why it's better. Then came the vegetables. Carlos chuckled as he remembered weighing them at the digital scale. Carrots, potatoes, lettuce. I'm glad I figured out how to use the scale. That code system was new to me, but it wasn't so hard once I watched someone else do it. He paused for a moment, thinking about the checkout process. Do you need a bag? He repeated to himself. That's a good question to remember. And card or cash. That's something I'll hear a lot, I think. Carlos sat down at the table with a notepad and wrote down the phrases he had learned. Excuse me, where is the do you need a bag, card, or cash? How much is this? Each phrase felt like a small piece of a larger puzzle. He practiced saying them aloud, imagining himself in similar situations. Next, he reflected on the numbers he had encountered at the checkout. $24.75, he said slowly, breaking it into smaller parts. I didn't catch it all when the cashier said it, but I saw the screen. Numbers are tricky, but I'll practice. Carlos decided to create a mini challenge for himself. He wrote down different prices on the notepad: $15.30, $8.99, $23.45, and practiced saying them aloud. $15.30, he repeated, imagining he was back at the checkout line. Finally, he looked at the receipt. It was full of useful information: the item names, quantities, and total cost. This is like a mini English lesson, he realized. He read through each line carefully, repeating the words to improve his pronunciation. By the time he finished, Carlos felt a renewed sense of confidence. I learned so much from just one trip, he thought. Next time, I'll be even better prepared. He smiled, proud of his progress. This wasn't just about buying groceries. It was about stepping out of his comfort zone and embracing the challenge of living in a new country. Carlos decided to take his learning one step further. He knew that simply reflecting on what he had learned wasn't enough. He needed to practice actively. Pulling out his notepad again, he wrote down a list of possible scenarios he might face the next time he visited the supermarket. Okay, he said aloud, tapping the pen against his chin. Let's start with something simple. What if I can't find something again? I need to practice asking for help. He wrote, "Excuse me, where is the..." and left a blank space. Carlos then filled the blank with different items he remembered seeing at the store. Milk, bread, apples, chicken. He practiced the sentence with each word, speaking slowly at first and then repeating it faster. Excuse me, where is the milk? Excuse me, where is the bread? He nodded to himself, satisfied with his progress. Next, he imagined another situation, asking for a recommendation. What if I want to try something new next time? He thought. He wrote down a question. Which one do you recommend? Carlos practiced this phrase too, imagining a conversation with a store employee. Which one do you recommend? I could use this for anything, not just at the supermarket, he realized. For his next practice scenario, Carlos revisited the checkout process. He remembered feeling nervous when the cashier had asked about payment. To prepare for next time, he wrote, "Card or cash? I'll pay with card. Do you take debit?" He read each phrase aloud multiple times, imagining himself back at the register. As he practiced, his confidence grew. Carlos then moved on to numbers. He wrote down random prices and practiced saying them just as he had done earlier. $12.50, $12.50, $3.99, $3.99, $45.20, $45.20. He even tried to challenge himself by creating a mock dialogue. "Carlos, how much is this?" "Cashier, it's $18.75. Carlos, "Okay, I'll pay with card." By speaking aloud, he could almost hear his own voice gaining clarity and confidence. For the final part of his practice, Carlos created a mini role-play exercise. He imagined himself helping a friend who also didn't know much English. He wrote down a scenario where his friend asked him how to find something. "Friend, excuse me, where is the rice?" "Carlos, it's in aisle 5. He played both roles, switching his tone and expression to match each character. This exercise made him laugh, but it also helped reinforce the phrases in his mind. Before wrapping up, Carlos decided to write a simple challenge for himself. The next time he went to the supermarket, he would ask a store employee for help with a new item, even if he didn't need it. Practice makes perfect, he thought. Feeling accomplished, Carlos closed his notepad and leaned back in his chair. The interactive exercises had not only reinforced what he learned, but also made him excited about using English in real-life situations. Carlos sat at the kitchen table, looking at the notepad filled with notes and phrases he had practiced. His grocery trip had been more than a simple chore. It was a small but meaningful milestone in his journey to adapt to life in a new country. He glanced at the bags of groceries on the counter and smiled. Each item represented a moment of learning. The milk from his first successful question, the bread from navigating the bakery section, the vegetables weighed at the digital scale, and the eggs, which came with unexpected advice from a friendly shopper. Even the chocolate bar, a small treat, symbolized his growing confidence. "Today I learned so much," Carlos said to himself, flipping through the pages of his notepad. "I know how to ask for help, find what I need, and even handle checkout conversations. And the best part, I actually did it." He paused, thinking about how nervous he had been that morning. The fear of speaking English, of making mistakes, had seemed overwhelming at first. But now, after completing the trip and reflecting on it, he felt a renewed sense of motivation. "I'm not perfect," he admitted with a laugh, "but I'm getting better. And that's what matters." Carlos decided to set a new goal for himself. The next time he went to the supermarket, he would expand his vocabulary further. Maybe he'd learn how to ask about sales or compare products. He might even try to strike up a conversation with another shopper or a cashier, just for practice. As the evening settled in, Carlos felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. This small victory gave him the confidence to tackle other challenges. Whether it was at the post office, a restaurant, or even a park, he knew he could apply what he had learned today to countless other situations. Before calling it a day, he jotted down a final note in his notepad. Every step counts. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're part of the journey. Looking at the note, Carlos nodded. That's right, he said aloud. Learning a new language isn't about being perfect. It's about trying. As he placed the notepad aside, Carlos felt a surge of excitement for what lay ahead. The world, with all its challenges and opportunities, seemed a little less intimidating now. And with each small step, he was becoming more confident, more capable, and more ready to embrace his new life. With that thought, Carlos smiled to himself, knowing that today was just the beginning.